All right. Hello, everyone. It is 6 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Holly Grand, and I'm going to be facilitating our webinar this evening. I just want to go over a few reminders before I hand it over to our presenters today. First of all, your cameras, microphones, and chat are all disabled for this webinar. If you have any questions at all during the presentation, please use that Q&A feature that you'll find on the bottom of your screen in Zoom. We will answer all of our questions at the end of the presentation, but you can use that Q&A at any point to type your question in so you don't forget about it later. If you'd like to provide a comment about the proposed Mariculture site that we're talking about here tonight, you must email those to our Oyster Mariculture email address, which is oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov. We are not taking any comments through Zoom. Tomorrow, you're going to be receiving a follow-up email from Zoom with that email address, along with a link to our Texas Parks and Wildlife Education YouTube channel, where a recording of this webinar is going to be uploaded. And that's all I want to go over. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our presenter this evening, Zach.
Hey, y'all, thanks for coming out tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. 1 second. Okay, can you see that, Holly?
Looks good.
Okay, well, thank y'all again for coming out this evening. We're here to talk about a proposed cultivated oyster mariculture grow out facility in Copano Bay. I know many of y'all on the call tonight have set in on many of these meetings, and so you're really familiar with kind of the order of operations. But just for those of you who are unfamiliar, we're going to start just by giving some quick background on cultivated oyster mariculture in Texas. I know many of you are very familiar with this program, but I just want to cover just some basic points in case there's anyone who's unfamiliar with that. Then we're going to transition into the specifics of the proposed cultivated oyster mariculture grow out facility. We're going to talk about the site location. We're going to talk about some of the proposed activities on that site. We're going to talk about the natural resources survey that was conducted there, just to give you all of that information. And then finally, we're going to spend a little bit of time in case anybody has any questions about the site specifically or about mariculture in general. And then finally, we're going to give you some instructions on how to submit public comment if you decide you want to do that. So we'll go ahead and jump into this. So first off, let's just start with a little bit of background in general on cultivated oyster mariculture in Texas. So Texas Parks and Wildlife Department started accepting applications for cultivated oyster mariculture in September of 2020. This is for off-bottom mariculture, both grow-out farms and hatchery facilities. We're here to talk about a proposed farm or grow-out facility tonight. But specifically regarding off-bottom mariculture, what that consists of is typically floating cages or floating bags that are placed in a permitted area within public waters. Those cages or bags are then stocked with oyster seed, and then that seed is allowed to grow to harvestable size in a grow-out facility, specifically allowed to grow to a harvestable size. I want to be clear that the seed that is stocked is seed from a hatchery. It's not wild oysters coming directly from wild reefs or anything like that. So it's stocked from hatcheries. We have very strict biosecurity protocols regarding that. And then finally, cages or bags are worked or cleaned, or the product is worked or cleaned in such a way that produces a valuable product for the food market. The site selection process is such that applicants typically nominate their own sites and then go through a pretty strenuous desktop analysis and then natural resources survey associated with Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to get to the point that we're at tonight. There's several different gears that have been used for oyster mariculture. There's floating cages, you can kind of see on the left of your screen there, floating bags to the right. There's also something called an adjustable longline system. The site we're going to be talking about tonight is using that floating bag system. You can see on the far right side, they're proposing the use of that floating bag system. Just some specifics about the permit and the permitting process. TPWD permit, the permit for mariculture, has a 10-year term. There is an associated annual fee that's levied based on the size of the grow out or nursery facility. And while TPWE is the lead agency in this program, we're not the only agency that has authority over various aspects of this program. There's several other state or federal agencies that applicants must get authorizations from before proceeding. This includes the Texas General Land Office, Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and U.S. Coast Guard. We do have an active use criteria for all of our sites, and that really just boils down to a minimum amount of stocking that we require on an active permit. We only allow the mariculture of Eastern oyster from Texas broodstock, and we have some pretty specific genetic and biosecurity protocols surrounding that. However, one of the benefits of mariculture is that we do allow year-round harvest of this product, again, because that's not coming from wild reefs. However, all harvest activities, even within mariculture, still must comply with all Texas Department of State Health Services regulations. So let's transition now to just some details about this proposed site. So the proposed site is here labeled G-0008. The 8 really just refers to the fact that this is the 8th completed permit that we've received. So we just have a sequential numbering sequence there. This is an oyster grow out facility, meaning that they're proposing to stock their facility with oyster seed and then grow them out to marketable size, which is 2.5 inches or greater, and then to be sold to the food market. It is located in Copano Bay. We'll show you a map here in a second of where exactly that's at. This is shellfish harvest area TX32. That is approved shellfish waters by the Texas Department of State Health Services. And the total acreage for the site is 2 acres. A couple of maps you're seeing on your screen here. I realize it's a little bit small, but the map all the way to the left, it's really just a scale map of the Aransas, Aransas and Copano Bay area. You can kind of see off of Live Oak Peninsula there, a star. That's the location of the grow out facility that we're talking about tonight. The map all the way to the right, if you zoom in, you can see it's located just south of Redfish Point. To the right of the picture here, this is the Copano Bay Causeway, just to orient you a little bit. But the site is located just to the south of Redfish Point. And again, it's a 2-acre site. That's approximately, or actually a little bit more than 1,500 feet from shoreline, just to help orient you to that distance there. The applicants proposed to use Zapco floating bags, as I alluded to earlier, Zapco being a name of a company that makes those bags. These bags are 2.8 foot by 1.5 feet by 1.5 foot high. So they're fairly small compared to some of the cages that we've seen in other proposed facilities. But as you'll see in a second here, the maximum array on this 2-acre site is just under actually 1,200 bags total. And again, I'll show you a schematic of that here in a second. And those bags are actually anchored to what's called a Zapco hurricane storm line. Or not anchored, tied off to a storm line. And each of those lines is anchored with a 54-inch helix anchor. The full site itself will be marked as per U.S. Coast Guard requirements. We'll rely on the U.S. Coast Guard to make that final designation as to how that should be marked. But typically that is either large buoys or pilings at the corner coordinates of those sites at minimum. The applicant also proposes use of a bird deterrent if needed. And really this just boils down to large zip ties, creating spikes essentially off of those cages to keep birds from landing on them. Just a little bit closer look at the Zapco floating bag system. So you can kind of see in the picture all the way to the right here, we have this large mesh bag where the oyster seed are stocked into, and then we have these 2 kind of long ballasts that allow the cages to float either in the water column or on top of the water, as you'll see in a second here. So we'll move to a site layout or a site array. So what you're looking at here is the full 2-acre site. You can see each corner is kind of where each of the buoys or pilings will be located. And each of the small black boxes given a line there, those are the Zapco floating bags located on those hurricane lines. Just to keep you from having to count those. It's 46 cages per line, and then I believe 13 lines per acre. So that's just under 600 cages per acre, and then just under 1,200 cages for the full kind of maximum array of this site. Kind of go to a cross-sectional view, so kind of looking into the water column here, just to give you an idea of what these cages look like in the water column. Let's kind of start to the right in the cross-sectional view here. The first kind of array that you're seeing there with the bag is probably the most common array that these cages or these bags will be in. That's essentially the ballasts floating the cage in the water column. It's typically known as a feeding array. It allows those oysters to feed in the water column, be submerged and feed in the water column. Those next two examples there are examples of those bags being floated on top of the water by those ballasts. That allows those oysters to dry and clean. It's an important part of the mariculture process. And then all the way to the left, we see those cages sunk to the bottom. So those ballasts can be filled with water and sunk. And really the only time that that would happen would be in preparation for a storm, a hurricane or tropical activity of some kind coming into the area. And that's really just to help reduce damage to the oysters and reduce damage or lost gear to those bags. So just some more specifics about on-site operations. The applicant proposes access via boat about twice a week. And I don't think I mentioned this in the actual map when I showed you earlier, but there is a proposed access route in that map, and that access route would be launching the boat at the South Copano Causeway boat ramp, many of you all are familiar with, and running around Redfish Point to that site. But the applicants propose accessing the site at least twice a week by boat. Desiccation of those oysters approximately once a week in the summer. That desiccation would occur at night, probably 4 p.m. to 10 a.m. Unused gear will be removed from the lines and from the site. Oysters will be tumbled and sorted at least once a week, and that can actually be done on site, the tumbling and sorting of those oysters. And then oysters, if desiccated, will be resubmerged for at least 14 days prior to harvest, as per FDA requirements. We do also require hurricane plans for all of our applicants, and this applicant did submit a very thorough hurricane plan. In short, this boils down to a 3-level approach that slowly intensifies those activities as the likelihood of that storm draws nearer. In short, it includes sinking those cages if needed, as you saw in that previous diagram, or adjusting the scope of lines to adjust for storm surge. Post-storm recovery would include refloating those bags, inventorying any missing gear, reporting that gear, and trying to get cleanup underway. So we'll transition now to the natural resources survey that was conducted by the applicant of the site. Again, we require a natural resources survey on all sites after a pretty intensive desktop analysis that we conduct. And the main point of this natural resources survey is to determine that there are going to be no seagrass habitat or oyster habitat impacts. Our specific regulations are such that we do not allow these sites to go within 200 foot of seagrass habitat or within 500 foot of oyster habitat. The diagram you can kind of see there on the left of your screen is the 2-acre site, which is shown in red, and then a 500-foot buffer around it. Each of those dots indicates a sampling location. The gear that was used to collect each sample was essentially a core made out of PVC, so collecting cores of the sediment. We require samples to be collected not just at the surface, but into the sediment, specifically with regard to seagrass, because we know that depending on salinity or temperature, seasonal conditions, there may not be above ground biomass for seagrass, but we want to make sure there's no below ground biomass either. So we require cores to be taken so they can be examined for seagrass rhizomes. So this survey was conducted in September of 2022, so just a couple of months back. The depth range reported in this site is 5 to 6 foot, and the results of this survey are fairly straightforward. There was no seagrass or oyster habitat located in the site, and the sediment is primarily a silt, as you can see in some of those pictures there. So some of the next steps here. So this presentation kind of opens the public comment period for this this proposed Mariculture site. The deadline for public comment is December 28th, 2022, and you can submit public comments to that oyster.mariculture@tpwd.texas.gov email address. I'll put that back on the screen here a little bit bigger here in a second. I'm going to open it up for questions here just in a couple of seconds here, but if you don't get your question answered tonight, or if you think of a question later, you can also submit questions to that email address and we'll get those answered for you as well. But we will open up a quick question answer section here in a second. Once we get through this public comment period and we receive public comments, we'll sit with the applicant and try to address any public comments we get surrounding this site. If it passes this public comment period, the applicant will be issued what's called a conditional permit. That permit is good for 1 year. That doesn't authorize them to begin mariculture activities. That only authorizes them to then go formally to some of the other agencies, state and federal agencies, that they need to secure authorizations from regarding mariculture. Again, including the General Land Office, including the Army Corps of Engineers, Coast Guard, agencies like that. Once the applicant secures those authorizations, they can then bring them back to Parks and Wildlife. We'll review them, make sure they're all in order. At that time, they'll be issued their final permit and they can begin mariculture activities. As always, if you have any questions on mariculture, you can always email us at the oyster.mariculture email address, or you can go to our website, TPWD's website, and you can find a mariculture informational page there. The easiest way to find that is to go to the TPWD website and just to search Cultivated Oyster Mariculture. A lot of good information on there regarding other proposed sites up and down the coast, upcoming public hearings, locations of those sites. Also, we have some frequently asked questions on that site as well. So please use that site. And then again, let me just put this email address up on the screen. If anybody has any questions that aren't answered tonight, again, we're going to open it up for questions, but if you have questions that aren't answered tonight, you can submit them to this email address, or to submit formal public comment, please do so at this email address. So that said, we are going to open up the question answer period for tonight. So please use the question answer function box that you have in your Zoom windows. And we'll be watching that. So we're going to open it up here for a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions, please type them into that question answer box and we will get those answered. All right, we have one question here. The question is, have applicants always been able to tumble on site, or is that a change from the original requirements? Did I get that wrong, Lindsay? Are they able to tumble on site?
So originally it was not necessarily stated one way or another about tumbling on site. Many other states have specifics about tumbling on site. It was perhaps assumed that they would tumble on site. We have now seen that there is a business and a safety need for many places to not actually tumble on site due to waves, boat size, equipment issues. So we do allow them to go to shore to a designated location to tumble, and that is something that we're looking when we get into TAC to kind of revise and add some further language to better define that.
Yeah, so to answer your question, John, they have always been allowed to tumble on site, but we're seeing that some folks are actually wanting to tumble on land now as well. But okay, I got another question here. It says, do you anticipate the new portal to expedite the process from TPWD's standpoint or provide more resources to applicants? So that's kind of always been our goal, is to kind of help try to expedite this process a little bit more. These last months and years have certainly been a learning curve for moving applications and applicants through this system. So always looking for ways to expedite that process. I'll open it up. Lindsay has a lot more insight into that portal, so I'll open it up for her and see if she has anything to say.
Yes, so we did just, TPWD is going through a process of converting actually many of their permits to the online permitting portal. And in many ways, this will expedite workflows and such. One great option that's in that is the ability to pay online, so you don't have to physically mail in a check to headquarters and that goes, so you can mail, you can still use that option, or you can pay online. As far as some of our processes, processing applications, I think some of the main time people see is once we receive our application, we have a committee that reviews within TPWD, reviews the application, then works back with the applicant to make any changes or clarifications. And then we have to set a public meeting date, which is again another at least 2 weeks for that notice. And then once you get your conditional permit, then you have to go get all the authorizations from other agencies, and our portal can't do anything, unfortunately, to expedite those processes. But we hope that the portal makes it easier to have one place that also from our back end where all those documents are preserved in one area. If anybody, not anybody, if an ecosystem leader or law enforcement needed to see those permits, but to further automate some of the things like sending out invoices for annual fees and payment thereof. So that answers the question.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, and I think I'd add to that, even with the portal, our hope is that we'll expedite and make that process smoother, at least on our end as an agency. I think though we'll continue to be available to applicants however they need, whatever kind of help or questions they need, even with an automated portal. So yep. Any other questions? We'll kind of keep it open for a couple more minutes. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions coming through. Again, if you kind of get off the call tonight and you think of a question that you want answered, feel free to use the oyster.mariculture website that you see on your screen right now. Also, if you decide to submit formal public comment about this proposed site, again, please do so through that oyster.mariculture email address you see on your screen. And that said, I'm going to turn it back over to Holly Grand to finish things off for us. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. And really just to kind of add on to what Zach was saying there, as far as wrapping this up, again, just another reminder, you're going to be getting an email tomorrow with that email address in it. So if you didn't write it down tonight, you can still be getting it in your email. And again, that link to this recording from this webinar will also, well, a link to the YouTube channel where you can find this video recording, hopefully tomorrow, will be in that email as well. So thank you all again for joining us this evening. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.